Warning! Tube amplifiers have lethal voltages inside them. Please do not attempt to build, test, or repair these without understanding and following all safety protocols. Hey y'all! Well, we're back on the EAR 834 Phono stage preamp clone build. And we got the board all done. Time to start doing the fab work on the chassis. I was thinking I was going to use a different power transformer to mount it internally, but it turns out that because these are DC heaters, the 6.3 volt rail doesn't have quite enough amperage rating to deal with these heaters. And even though I'm not going to be using as much of the 250 volt rail, and it would probably balance out as far as the load on the transformer to keep it from overheating, it's also kind of pushing the envelope on what that transformer's rating would be. And for a preamp, that's really not a good idea to be pushing the transformer. Plus, having the one with the end bells mounted on top keeps it away from the rest of the circuit. And it's probably one of the reasons I haven't had some of the hum problems that I see other people having. So I'm going to stick with what I know works. And we're going to put the slightly more expensive sitting on top Hammond transformer with the choke inside, and just go with this new style that I'm using with the shorter chassis than I did in the last video, and leaving the board all in one piece. So I'm going to show you the tools you need to get. Again, just go on eBay and pick up one of these punches. It's the best way to do these holes. If you want to try using a hole saw, you can, and then maybe even get one that's slightly smaller so that you can then file it to the right shape and clean it up, because a hole saw is going to leave a pretty rough looking hole. But I'll show you how to do this using the Greenleaf punches. We already laid out the top. I did that in an earlier video before we populated the board. So let's get this fab work done. Then we can go paint this thing, go finish assembling it, and then go listen to what this great thing sounds like, because I know it's going to sound awesome. So it's time to do the layout for the chassis to do the fab work on it. And we've got one we've completed previously that we're going to take measurements off of, because we're basically duplicating what we've done previously because it worked so well. Now, what I told you to do before, when you were working on the board, before you solder all this stuff on the bottom of it, and the board's still flat, or maybe even when the board's just totally unpopulated, lay it down on top of the chassis and mark all of these holes. Now, none of these have to be super precision, because the tubes, as you can see, they kind of move around a little bit. I mean, obviously they're solidly seated, but if you have to move them a couple of millimeters one way or the other to have them centered in the hole, it's not a big deal. And they just need to be pretty much centered between these points. And I'll show you how to measure this stuff out. I'm also going to go ahead and put a layout drawing of this fab work so that you can have stuff to go off of. The other thing that's super handy, pick up one of these off Amazon. It's a kind of a caliper, I guess a vernier marking tool. It's got a little scribe here with a little roller. And you can use vernier calipers too, but I found this tool just makes things a lot easier and is more accurate. And so what we initially did was we put these holes on this end at 20 millimeters from the front edge. Okay? And so the next hole we're going to be putting, and like I said, you go 20 millimeters, set the board down, and then just direct mark all of these holes, holding the board centered between the edges. And that way you know that it's going to mount correctly. So the next hole we have to do is this one. And it looks like it's 42 millimeters from the front edge. Now, if you want to do this measurement yourself, or how I figured this out, was you could measure from this hole, the center of this hole, to this edge, then measure from the center of the tube socket to this, and then do the math to figure out how far this hole is from this front edge to find the center point of this first tube. But I'm telling you, if you set these first two holes at 20 millimeters, if you go to 42 millimeters for the first hole, it's going to be right on the money. So we come in and we kind of guess about where the center is going to be and mark that 42 millimeters. Then the next thing we want to do is measure to the second hole. These are really the only measurements that, if you get these way off, it's going to look weird. And then the last hole is 135 millimeters. And we'll put that there. And the next thing you want to do is find the center. And you probably want to check and make sure that these are centered from the edge. And if they're off just a little bit, it's not a huge deal. You can just kind of shift these holes over just a breath. And I think I got these drilled off just a little bit. Like the one on this side is 16 millimeters. And then the one on this side is about 18 millimeters. So we want to move this center line hole over about 1 millimeter to get these in the center, or the tubes centered in their sockets. So 76 millimeters is probably going to be about the center of that, or real close to it. I'm going to mark all three of these holes. Then we'll come in with our little Sharpie and just make a little dot, just so we don't make a mistake about where we're drilling. And again, these things don't have to be perfect within a millimeter, because the tubes do move around a little bit in the socket, so that's not a huge deal. The next thing we want to do is we want to put these two RCA sockets in. And it looks like 205 millimeters. It's going to be real close to what those are. Looks like a good spot. And then put a really light little, with this plastic stuff, you can just drag this little point across it. It makes a real light little mark there. And then these look like, that's 60, looks like 63 millimeters. Yep. So come in from each side. And put that on. And that. And obviously the position of these little RCA jacks isn't critical, because they're mounted on wires. To me, just getting the layout right is probably the most important part of this. And then once you get everything laid out, the actual drilling the holes is pretty easy. So now we got our indicator LED, and it's 30 millimeters from the edge, and it's lined up over this hole. So we just want to come in and go like that. Little dot. You know, that's where a little indicator LED is going to be. Okay, the next thing we got to do is the transformer mounting holes. And what I usually do is just put this where I think it looks okay. And have this back edge basically of the bell even with the back edge of this chassis. And then come with our Sharpie and mark the 4 holes. And these have slots in them, so you can adjust it a little bit you know, like this, is you need it to get it square once you've got all the holes drilled. The next thing is this little power switch here. It's 35 millimeters from the back. Again, just really lightly scribe this plastic, and then it won't go all the way through and scratch the metal. And it's 45 millimeters from this side. I'll mark our little dot there. Little dots just kind of help make sure you know that those are actually marks and they're not just little scratches that were in that plastic. So got the front and the back, and on the back, let's see if I can do this without having to deal with refocusing the camera. We've got these two holes here that are for the choke. And that looks like 59 millimeters. And then the second hole is like 104 millimeters. We're real close to it. And we'll see how far it is from the bottom. Looks like 19 millimeters. So we got these two holes here. And then last, I'm going to come back in and draw in the IEC socket. So let's do the front ones, and then we'll have all the holes laid out. So these front RCA jacks should be even here. Yep, there's 62 millimeters from each side. Come in and really light little mark there. Do a light mark there. And come up here and measure from this bottom edge. It's like 15 millimeters. And like I said, I'll put together some drawings of this, which I haven't done in the past for chassis layout, but since this is a pretty popular thing people are building, I'll go ahead and do that for you guys. Now, this screw will be at the same center point, so we'll go ahead and just kind of guess a spot where it'll be, and then measure in from the edge. Looks like 33 millimeters. And there we go. And there's the 3 mounting points on the front. So let me get my drills all ready, and we'll drill these out, and I'll show you how to punch these holes with the green lead punch. Okay, so we got our marks all transferred over, and I've already drilled some of these pilot holes for the mounting points for the board, but I haven't done any for these other holes. So I've got some blocks of wood, scrap wood, put underneath the chassis here that supports it so I don't dent or put a big cave in where I'm marking these holes. And I come in with a little center punch and okay, and I'm not sure if I don't think I did this front one. And so next we come in with a drill and we pilot drill all these holes. And it really helps to keep that wood underneath here so the drill doesn't go, slamming through and the chuck hits the top of the metal. Now we are going to be painting this chassis, so if we put a little scratch or two on the top of it, it's not a big deal. But if you were planning on doing this like polished aluminum, you definitely have to be a lot more careful that you don't scratch up the metal, because then that makes the process of trying to polish the aluminum so much harder. Oh, I missed that one. Okay, so there's all our pilot holes drilled in the top of the chassis, and then I'm going to come in here and very lightly and it's probably a good idea to get the little choke that you're going to use and hold it up and make sure that the holes are in the right place. And actually somehow we measured this wrong, which is fine. We're catching this early. This hole needs to be over, like right there. So you're going to hold it up there. Now it's sitting like that. And this is why I like to hold the components up that I'm going to be mounting and not 100% depend on what I'm measuring, because I occasionally do make mistakes. Then you get holes drilled in the wrong place. And then before we drill, hold the choke up once again, and that looks perfect. We'll drill these two holes. And I'm just kind of eyeballing those RCA socket holes, and they all look like they're in the right place. And again, they're not super critical. Oh, drill walked on us there. And there we go. So now I need to come back and drill out all of these chassis holes a little bit to this size bit that I have here, so the screws will fit through. Yeah, let me just check with one of my screws here, make sure we drilled this out for a 3mm screw fits through. Yep. Okay, so we got all those holes drilled. The next thing I'm going to do is go ahead and get the chassis punch set up and punch these 3 holes out. So let me get all that stuff together and I'll come back and show you how to do that. Okay, we're using a Greenlee punch that looks like this. The one we're using is a 1 3/16, which is the same size that you'll need to punch holes in a chassis for an octal socket. So this is just a good size to have if you're going to be doing tube amplifier work. Drill a hole the size that this draw bolt will fit through in the chassis. So let's drill these 3 holes out. just like that. You want to make sure you get all the chips off the top of it so that the die doesn't press into the metal with the chips and put marks on the top. It doesn't matter if the inside's smooth or not because we're punching this out. So even though this has some plastic on here, it's always a good idea to just put a little piece of paper like this on the underside of that part there. And then this screws in on the die on the underside. And then we just come in here with the adjustable wrench or whatever you want to turn this with. And this will be quite easy to pop a hole in this given how thin this aluminum is. And got a perfect hole. So let's do this 2 more times. Then we need to decide what size bolts we're going to use for the transformer and measure the switch we're going to use and drill that hole out. And then the same thing, pretty sure I'm going to be using these 3mm Allen bolts to hold this choke down, so that hole should be the right size as is. And then I'll show you how to drill these RCA jack holes, how to figure out the size of those, and then how to lay out the IEC socket, and then I'll show you what that looks like, and then we'll be ready to go paint this chassis. And then once it's painted, we can come back and assemble this thing. Okay, we've got the rest of the holes drilled here. We're going to be using 1024 button head screws to hold the transformers down. So drill these holes out. Drill this hole out for the LED, and you want to just drill it out to whatever size hole of the LED that you're planning on using. You can use the one that came with the kit. I'm putting a little larger one in here just so it's a little more visible, and I don't run these quite as bright as they would normally, so having a larger one that's not quite as bright makes a good indicator. Got the RCA holes drilled for the jacks there, and also on the front you want to make sure that you drill them out for the little step that's here on this washer. Let me see if I can zoom in here, and you can see there's a little step there on that washer, and you want that hole to be drilled so that step insulates the RCA jack from the chassis. So once we get all these holes punched out, a really handy tool is this little guy here, and you'll find them in the plumbing department at a hardware store. They're designed for cleaning out or deburring the inside of a threaded pipe when you cut them off and rethread them. And they work really good for coming in here and like doing like this, doing the inside and the outside of these holes, you know, around here, and just cleaning up all the, or basically deburring the hole like the tool's designed to make. On these other holes, you can just come back with like a much bigger drill bit, and either by hand or the drill, just kind of run it over. Like on these smaller ones, you probably want to use a bit about this size, and just deburr them on the inside out, get all the holes all cleaned up. Then the last thing we did was we cut the hole out for the IEC socket, and I've been using just one of these little wood coping saws. They seem to work really well on getting it rough shaped. And then I come back with a half round bastard file and, you know, file them to shape with a IEC socket fits nice and snug in there. And you can see we get a really nice snug fit. And this little hole here is for the power ground off the third pin on the IEC socket. While it might be tempting to use the screws that you're holding the IEC socket in with, these are into plastic and they're not, you just can't get them real tight. So much better to drill a separate hole here and mount the IC ground to this part of the chassis here, because that's going to be our chassis ground. And then there's where the choke's going to go. And then on the front, this is going to be the signal ground point, and also going to be where we ground the turntable. So anyway, let me strip this plastic off and show you what it looks like, and then we're going to go paint this thing. And there's what the chassis all fabbed up looks like. Now I've built a couple of them where I've just kind of maybe scuffed them up a little bit with a Scotch-Brite pad to, get the few little marks off, and just left them bare aluminum. But I think they look better painted with textured black. And we're going to be using this Krylon Fusion textured black. Really nice paint. It adheres well, and it just really does a good job. Before we paint it, I may come in and clean up the edges of these holes a little bit, get them nice and smooth, and come back with some sandpaper, smooth that off, go over the whole thing with some 400 grit sandpaper to give it a little texture for the paint to bite to, and shoot some paint on this thing. The nice thing about that textured paint is, even if you're not like a pro painter, it still comes out looking really nice. It doesn't show imperfections like trying to do it with glossy or even semi-gloss paint would look like. But obviously, you can paint them white, you can paint it teal green, you can paint it whatever color you want that you think would look cool. And that's part of the fun of DIYs. You can make it your own. So anyway, I'm going to go shoot some paint on this thing and show you what it looks like. And here we are a day later with the finished painted unit. One thing I neglected to show yesterday was drilling these two holes here for the wires for the power transformer. And here they are with the grommets installed. I got this little kit off Amazon that's got a nice selection of grommets. You see here it's got, I need to restock this size here, but you can see it comes with a really nice assortment of different sizes, and you definitely want to put grommets where you have holes where wires go through the chassis. And this textured black Krylon Fusion paint really does look nice. You can see it's got a really nice sheen to it. It mimics the appearance of powder coating that comes on the pre-coated Hammond chassis. And so if you've got an amplifier that you maybe built like I have with these pre-powder coated Hammond steel chassis, and there we go. So we got all the fab work done, we got it painted, we are ready to start assembling this thing, and I think that's a great spot to finish up this video. Well, I hope that wasn't too scary showing you how to do this. I know for a lot of people this fabrication work is the really daunting thing, and this is a good project to get your feet wet on doing fabrication work, because for one thing, it's a box already made, so you don't have to worry about dealing with that, and it's pretty thin gauge aluminum, so it's not hard to work with. The box is cheap, so if you really screw it up, you're not throwing away a lot of money if you have to start over on another one. And if you do make a mistake, I would recommend go ahead and finish it as good as you can so you can get some practice working on what will end up being the scrap one before you try again on the new one. So again, I think this is a great first DIY project, and if you listen to vinyl, you are going to be blown away with how one of these boxes transforms your vinyl listening experience. Because I know for me, it was very transformative, and the reason I've sold so many of these to my friends is all I have to do is take one of these things over and plug it in between their turntable and their amp, and they're like breaking their wallet out. So anyway, hope you're enjoying the series. If you are, please subscribe to the channel. Please like the video. Thanks again to you Patreon folks and you folks making donations. Probably going to put this specific preamp up for sale for my Patreon users. So here we go, guys. This will be the first one that's going to be put out there. And we're probably going to be selling the KT120 mono blocks on the Patreon site too. So anyway, thanks again. Until the next video, y'all have a nice day.